This is an exploration of how ideas of weathering and post-occupancy are found in the real world. It will take place through 5 case studies, each representing a different aspect of life. The first case study explores weathering through the work of a British artist, Andy Goldsworthy. Goldsworthy produces site-specific earthworks at various scales that are designed to highlight the effect of time and nature. Galleries defined by the earth and sky react to the environment to create ephemeral sculptures, emphasizing this notion of temporality. As I said in my previous vlog, deterioration is a part of life, and instead of trying to fight against weathering as some architects do, Goldsworthy embraces it wholeheartedly. Rather than championing purity and pristineness by creating art meant to be kept in a sterile environment of a museum, he chooses to show evidence of the life of the materials, similar to the way Carlos Scarpa intentionally set up the means for the weathering of his buildings. I think by embracing weathering, we can take steps towards making both art and architecture more accessible. The refurbishment viaduct arches by EM2N answer the question of how old infrastructure elements can be programmed and incorporated into a modern urban system. When visiting the Strip District, we took note of how the terminal was so uniform that it didn't speak to the character of the existing building. EM2N attempted something similar but was more successful in my opinion. In the case of the refurbishment of viaduct arches, the masonry forms a central atmospheric element with the new structure deliberately restrained to emphasize the character of the arches. In highlighting the old, the new is able to enhance the space instead of detracting from it the way it did with the terminal. I looked for documentation of the user experience, and it was impossible to find without actually connecting with the people in Zurich during the space. You would think that a project designed to revitalize a dead space would want to assess the post-occupied experience to understand if they were successful. This is a common theme seen in architecture. If we can evaluate a building's performance after construction, why can't we also evaluate the user experience? Cast iron cookware has evolved greatly during its long history. The material was first discovered in the 5th century BC in China, where it was used in a variety of ways, and it wasn't until the 15th century AD that it made its way to the Western world, where it was mostly used for artillery. In the 18th century, cast iron cookware became popular, and eventually the method used to make cookware today was developed by Abraham Darby. While much of Darby's design remains today, leading brands have continued to develop the design to maximize its potential. As mentioned previously, the design process often stops after the first user enters a space. This idea of continuing the design process after construction to create something that's even more efficient or effective is something that needs to be more widely spread in the architectural field, so that we can maximize our built environment to create a more sustainable future. Another interesting aspect of cast iron cookware is that in order for it to be effective, it needs to be weathered. Each use forms a protective carbonized layer of seasoning, and depending on the technique used, the seasoning imparts different flavors in the cooking. The weathering of the cookware not only reveals the life of the cookware, but also enhances its user experience. If you peel back the layers, what can you uncover? To compare it to something close to home, each layer of our beloved CMU fence tells a story of an interaction. It's a documentation of the celebrations, tragedies, announcements, and everyday life of the CMU community. It wouldn't be the same without its layers. They're what give it life. The Green New Deal proposed by AOC in 2019 is one iteration in a series of proposals that have been trying to address climate change and societal injustices through public policy for years. The original was President Roosevelt's New Deal, which was a response to the Great Depression. The Green New Deal proposals evolved to combine these original ideas with current affairs such as renewable energy, resource efficiency, and just transition. Architecture is intrinsically affected by these new policies since they influence the fight for housing justice, land conservation, and environmental sustainability, and close to half of all greenhouse gas emissions come from the built environment. The Green New Deal affects how we inhabit and occupy spaces and places, and the ways we design need to adapt accordingly. This proposal will help pave the way as we build for resilience and sustainability, iterating upon the past to design for the future. Reincarnation is an ongoing spiritual cycle of birth, death, and transmigration that's bound by karma. According to Hinduism, the problem of the human predicament is a lack of awareness that Atman, or our souls, are all part of Brahman, and that it will eventually return to him. Only upon experiencing the realization that Atman is Brahman will one be able to be liberated from the cyclicality of all life, matter, and existence. Transmigration is not the same as a second life, similar to the way post-occupancy as an extension of the existing life is not the same as adaptive reuse. Each cycle allows the soul to take the lessons learned in the previous body into the next, and to do things differently going forward as they strive for enlightenment. The Atman and its spiritual energy remain the same at its essence, yet with each step in its journey towards moksha, the past is brought along, allowing for a variation in the future, ideally for the better. In the same vein, architecture should be revisited once the initial construction is finished in order to assess whether or not it was performing up to the standard, and if not, what can be done to further its success while still taking into account the existing systems and designs. Through these case studies, I've come to understand post-occupancy as an iterative process that takes into account time, space, and experience the same way weathering does. Both are very site-specific processes that are unique to each project, and truly grasping and acknowledging these concepts is imperative in our efforts to make architecture more accessible.